Something unusual has started happening around your name, and you may not even fully realize the magnitude of it yet. Conversations that once passed quietly now carry an intensity that people cannot seem to contain. Individuals are talking, reacting, questioning, and in many cases losing their composure over how someone is now speaking about you. For a long time, the narrative surrounding you may have been controlled by certain voices, interpretations, and assumptions that traveled through conversations without being deeply examined. People formed opinions based on fragments of information, partial stories, or perspectives that were never fully challenged. But now something has shifted. Someone has begun speaking about you in a way that is disrupting the entire structure of those old assumptions. The words being shared about you are not simply adding another opinion into the mix. They are forcing people to reconsider everything they believed before. This sudden change has created a wave of reactions within the community. Some people feel shocked because the new perspective contradicts what they accepted for so long. Others feel confused because the person they thought they understood now appears very different through this new lens. And then there are those who are quietly observing, recognizing that something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface of these conversations. What they are witnessing is the moment when a long-standing narrative begins to crack under the weight of truth and lived experience. For chosen ones, moments like this are rarely random. Often there comes a time when the story surrounding you can no longer be maintained by assumptions alone. When someone who has seen the reality of your journey finally speaks openly, the entire atmosphere begins to shift. People who once listened passively now feel compelled to pay attention. And as these conversations spread, something remarkable begins to happen. The image of who you are starts transforming in the minds of those who once thought they had you completely figured out. Why your name is suddenly everywhere begins with a moment that feels almost surreal when you first notice it. For a long time, your presence may have existed in the background of people's awareness. You moved through environments quietly focusing on your own growth, your responsibilities, and the path that felt true to you. Yet suddenly, something has changed. Conversations that once moved past your name quickly now linger on it. People who previously had little interest in discussing you are now mentioning you with curiosity, surprise, and sometimes intense emotion. It may feel confusing at first because you did not initiate this shift. You did not call attention to yourself, nor did you attempt to reshape how others saw you through loud declarations. Instead, the sudden rise of your name in conversations is the result of something deeper. The narrative surrounding you has begun to change. When a narrative changes, especially one that has existed quietly for a long time, it creates a ripple effect that spreads quickly through communities and social circles. Human beings are naturally drawn to stories that challenge what they once believed. The moment people hear that someone is speaking about you differently than before, curiosity awakens. Curiosity is powerful because it encourages people to revisit the information they previously accepted without question. They begin asking themselves whether the earlier understanding they held about you was incomplete or inaccurate. In many cases, this process begins with just a few conversations. Someone mentions your name in a context that surprises the listener. The listener shares that moment with another person, expressing how unexpected the statement sounded. Soon those two individuals are discussing you together, comparing what they once heard with what they are hearing now. This is how your name gradually becomes a central topic within the environment around you. Yet the attention itself is not the most significant part of this moment. The deeper transformation lies in the shift of perspective that accompanies it. For years, some people may have viewed you through a narrow lens shaped by limited information or by voices that interpreted your actions in a particular way. Those interpretations may have been repeated so often that they began to feel like established truth. But repetition alone cannot permanently hold a narrative together when reality continues evolving. As time passed, your life did not freeze within the version of the story that others once told. You continued growing, learning, refining your direction, and demonstrating qualities that those earlier narratives could not fully explain. The people who interacted with you directly began forming their own impressions based on real experiences rather than second-hand descriptions. Over time, these impressions accumulated quietly, creating an undercurrent of understanding that differed from the old narrative. Yet that undercurrent remained mostly unspoken until someone finally expressed it openly. Once that happened, the environment around you began shifting rapidly. Suddenly, people realized that the story they had accepted for so long might not represent the complete truth. When such a realization enters a community, conversations intensify because individuals are trying to reconcile two different versions of the same person. On one hand, there is the version they heard about through earlier conversations. On the other hand, there is the version now being described by someone who appears confident enough to challenge the old narrative. This contrast sparks a wave of curiosity. People begin asking questions they never asked before. They start remembering moments when their own interactions with you did not fully match the criticisms they had heard. Perhaps someone recalls a time when you offered help without expecting recognition. Another person remembers a moment when you remained calm during a difficult situation, while others reacted emotionally. These memories resurface because the new conversations give people permission to reconsider what they once dismissed. The process of reconsideration is rarely dramatic. It unfolds quietly in the minds of individuals who begin comparing stories with experiences. Yet even though the transformation is subtle, its effects are powerful. Once people begin trusting their own observations more than inherited narratives, the balance of influence shifts. Your name becomes central, not because you demanded attention, but because the community itself is trying to understand the gap between perception and reality. As this process unfolds, you may notice something unusual happening in the way people approach you. Some individuals who previously seemed distant now display curiosity or respect. Others who once avoided engaging deeply with you may now seek conversation as though they are trying to understand you more clearly. Meanwhile, the individuals who maintained the earlier narrative may react with confusion or frustration. They may struggle to understand why the conversations around your name have taken a direction they did not anticipate. From their perspective, the story they repeated for years should still hold its influence. Yet influence weakens when people begin examining evidence instead of accepting assumptions. The reason your name is suddenly everywhere lies in the contrast between persistence and perception. You persisted quietly through years when the narrative surrounding you was not always favorable. You continued developing your character, refining your values, and building your life even when recognition did not immediately follow. Meanwhile, perception within the community slowly evolved as more individuals encountered the reality of who you were becoming. When those two forces, persistence and perception, finally intersect, the result is a moment like the one unfolding now. People begin speaking about you not because you demanded their attention, but because your story no longer fits inside the narrow explanations that once defined it. Your presence challenges the earlier assumptions people held, and that challenge creates conversation. The conversations themselves become a form of awakening within the community. Individuals realize that their understanding of you was shaped by incomplete information. They recognize that the person standing in front of them today cannot be fully explained by the old narrative. This recognition produces a mixture of reactions. Some people feel excitement because they are witnessing the emergence of a new perspective. Others feel discomfort because they must confront the possibility that they misunderstood you for a long time. Yet both reactions share a common origin, the realization that the story surrounding you is changing. And when a story changes, it captures attention. Human beings are drawn to moments when long-standing assumptions collapse and new understanding begins forming. That is why your name now travels through conversations with unusual intensity. Each discussion represents someone attempting to make sense of the transformation they are witnessing. They are not simply talking about you. They are processing the realization that their previous understanding may have been incomplete. In this sense, the sudden attention surrounding your name is not merely about reputation. It is about the human instinct to seek truth once contradictions appear. People are observing that despite the narratives that once surrounded you, your life continues moving forward with clarity and resilience. They see someone who endured misunderstanding, yet remained grounded in their values. And that observation creates a powerful curiosity that spreads from one conversation to the next. The result is the phenomenon you are witnessing. Now your name appearing everywhere, carried by voices trying to understand how the person they thought they knew has revealed a depth they never fully recognized before. The person who sparked the conversation begins to reveal itself as the turning point in this unfolding story, because every shift in perception usually begins with one voice brave enough to say something different from what everyone else has been repeating. For a long time, the narrative about you may have moved through conversations quietly, almost automatically, as if it were simply accepted truth. People repeated certain ideas about who you were, what you represented, or why your journey looked the way it did. Some of those ideas may have been built on misunderstandings, others on incomplete observations, and some perhaps on interpretations shaped by people who had their own emotional investment in the story. Yet narratives built this way often remain unchallenged until someone steps forward with a different perspective. That moment is exactly what has begun happening now. Somewhere within the environment around you, someone has started speaking about you in a way that disrupts the entire structure of what others thought they understood. This person may not have intended to create such a powerful reaction, yet the effect of their words has been immediate and far-reaching. When someone who has credibility within a community suddenly describes you differently, listeners naturally pay attention. They may initially react with surprise, even disbelief. After all, hearing a story that contradicts what you believed for years can feel disorienting. Yet curiosity quickly follows surprise, and curiosity leads people to listen more carefully than they did before. The individual who sparked this new wave of conversation may come from many possible roles in your life. It might be someone who once misunderstood you, but eventually realized that the narrative they accepted did not match the reality they observed. It could be someone who spent enough time around you to witness your character firsthand, someone who saw the quiet discipline, resilience, and consistency that others overlooked. It might even be someone who once stood among your critics, but gradually recognized that the story they helped maintain did not align with the truth unfolding before their eyes. Regardless of their position, the key element is that this person carries a voice people are willing to hear. Communities rarely shift their perception because of anonymous whispers or uncertain speculation. Change begins when someone with credibility, clarity, or first-hand experience introduces a perspective that others cannot easily dismiss. When that person speaks, people pause. They listen more closely than they normally would. And once they begin listening, the ripple effect begins. What this individual has said about you may not be dramatic or sensational. In many cases, the most powerful statements are the simplest ones. They may have described your perseverance during times when others expected you to give up. They may have spoken about how consistently you handled challenges with patience instead of anger. They may have shared moments when your actions demonstrated integrity that contradicted the negative assumptions people once held about you. These kinds of observations carry weight because they are rooted in experience rather than speculation. When someone explains that they have personally seen a different side of you than the one people have been discussing, for years, listeners begin reconsidering their own understanding. At first, they may try to reconcile the new information with the old narrative. They might assume there must be some explanation that preserves both perspectives at once. But as the conversation continues, it becomes harder to maintain that balance. The details shared by the person speaking about you start creating a more complete picture of your character. That picture may reveal aspects of your journey that were never included in the earlier narrative. Perhaps they mention the challenges you faced privately, the work you invested quietly, or the sacrifices you made without seeking recognition. These elements add depth to the story surrounding you, and that depth changes how people interpret the past. Once listeners hear enough details that contradict the old narrative, they begin asking themselves an important question: if this perspective is accurate, what else about the earlier story might have been incomplete? This question is the moment when the entire conversation begins transforming. Instead of simply repeating the familiar narrative, people begin investigating it. They recall conversations from years earlier and compare them with what they are hearing now. They revisit situations they once interpreted negatively and wonder whether they misunderstood them at the time. The person who sparked the conversation may not even realize how much influence their words are carrying. In many cases, they are simply sharing their experience honestly, perhaps motivated by a desire to correct an unfair perception or to acknowledge the growth they witnessed in you over time. Yet honesty spoken in the right moment can carry extraordinary power. When someone articulates a truth that others have quietly sensed but never expressed, it releases a wave of recognition throughout the environment. People suddenly feel permission to reconsider what they once accepted without question. This is why the reaction surrounding your name has become so intense. The individual speaking about you did not merely introduce a new opinion. They challenged the foundation of the old narrative. Once that foundation begins shaking, conversations accelerate quickly. Individuals who hear the new perspective begin sharing it with others, not necessarily because they want to create drama, but because they are trying to understand the implications of what they have learned. They might say something as simple as, "Did you hear what was said about them?" And that question alone can ignite an entire discussion. Each person who hears the story adds their own memories, observations, or interpretations. Some may recall moments when they personally saw your resilience. Others may remember times when your behavior seemed inconsistent with the accusations they had heard. These reflections gradually build momentum, transforming individual curiosity into a collective reassessment. Meanwhile, you may be watching this shift unfold from a distance, perhaps even with a sense of disbelief. After all, for years, you carried the weight of a narrative that did not fully reflect who you were. You learned to move forward despite the misunderstandings surrounding you. You continued developing your path quietly because you understood that arguing endlessly against perception rarely changes it. And now, unexpectedly, someone else has begun articulating the truth that time has been revealing all along. This moment is significant, not because it validates you in the eyes of others. Your growth never depended on that validation, but because it demonstrates how truth eventually finds its voice. Sometimes it emerges through the person who experienced the journey directly. Other times it emerges through someone who witnessed the journey from the outside and finally recognizes what it truly meant. In your case, the person who sparked this conversation has become the catalyst for a much larger awakening within the community. Their words have opened a space where people feel comfortable questioning the narrative they once accepted. And once people begin questioning, they begin observing more carefully. They start paying attention to the difference between rumors and reality, between assumptions and actions. Over time, this process reveals a clearer understanding of who you are. The remarkable part of this shift is that it does not rely on dramatic confrontation. The person who sparked the conversation did not need to argue aggressively or demand that others change their perspective. They simply shared what they knew, and the truth contained in that perspective began working on its own. Truth has a way of spreading quietly but powerfully once it is spoken with clarity. It moves from one mind to another, encouraging reflection and reconsideration. And as this process continues, the narrative surrounding you begins evolving in ways that no one could have predicted years earlier. What started with a single voice has now become a conversation that people cannot ignore. A conversation that is forcing them to look at you through an entirely different lens. Why people are reacting so strongly begins to reveal itself when you consider the emotional and psychological impact that occurs whenever a long-standing narrative suddenly begins to shift. Human beings build their understanding of others through stories. Those stories are often formed slowly over time through conversations, observations, and repeated interpretations of events. Once those stories become familiar, they start feeling stable, almost permanent, even if the information they were built upon was never fully accurate. When someone hears the same explanation about a person again and again, the mind gradually accepts it as the framework through which that person should be understood. For a long period of time, that framework may have shaped how people interpreted you. Some individuals may have believed they understood your character based on fragments of information or interpretations passed through others. But the moment a new perspective enters the conversation, especially one that challenges the foundation of what people previously believed, it disrupts that mental framework. And disruption often triggers strong reactions. The intensity of people's reactions right now is not simply about you. It is about the collapse of certainty within their own understanding. When someone realizes that a story they accepted for years might not represent the full truth, it creates a powerful emotional experience. Some people react with shock because the new information contradicts something they felt confident about before. Others react with curiosity because they suddenly feel compelled to understand how the earlier narrative became so widely accepted. And some react with discomfort because acknowledging the possibility of misunderstanding forces them to confront their own role in repeating or believing the story. This emotional complexity explains why conversations about you have suddenly become so charged. It is not merely gossip or casual curiosity. It is the psychological process of people re-examining a belief system that once felt secure. When that process begins, people often become more vocal than usual. They talk intensely, sometimes even emotionally, because they are trying to reconcile two conflicting versions of reality at once. On one side exists the narrative they accepted before. On the other side exists the emerging perspective now being introduced into the community. The stronger the contradiction between those two perspectives, the stronger the reaction tends to be. In your situation, the contradiction is particularly powerful because your life has continued evolving quietly during the years when the old narrative circulated. While some people repeated assumptions about you, your actions were gradually revealing a different story. You continued growing, working, and refining your direction even when recognition did not immediately follow. That consistency now stands in direct contrast to the earlier interpretations people heard about you. When observers compare the new perspective being shared with the evidence of your long-term behavior, they begin realizing that the earlier story may have lacked important context. This realization often produces a moment of emotional shock, not because the truth about you is negative, but because people recognize how easily misunderstandings can spread when they are repeated often enough. Many individuals are now experiencing a subtle form of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when someone holds two conflicting beliefs at the same time. In this case, one belief may be the narrative they heard about you years ago, while the other belief is the evidence now appearing through conversations and observation. The mind naturally tries to resolve this tension by searching for a clearer explanation. That search is exactly what is fueling the intense discussions surrounding your name right now. People are not simply reacting emotionally. They are attempting to reconstruct their understanding of who you are. As they do this, many begin revisiting past experiences with you that they may have overlooked or misinterpreted before. They might remember moments when you handled pressure with calmness, even when others expected you to react differently. They may recall situations where your actions demonstrated integrity, generosity, or resilience that never aligned with the negative assumptions they once heard. These memories begin resurfacing because the new conversation provides a lens through which people can reinterpret the past. What once seemed like isolated moments now appears as part of a consistent pattern of character. When people begin connecting those patterns, their emotional reaction intensifies because they realize that the truth about you may have been visible all along, simply unnoticed or misunderstood. Another reason the reactions are so strong lies in the nature of reputation within communities. Reputation functions like a shared agreement about how someone should be perceived. Once that agreement forms, people rarely question it unless something forces them to. The new perspective being spoken about you is now forcing that question. Listeners are realizing that their understanding may have been shaped by incomplete information or by voices that interpreted events through their own emotional filters. Recognizing this possibility can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the reliability of the social narratives people depend on to navigate relationships. Yet discomfort is often the first step toward deeper understanding. The emotional intensity surrounding your name right now reflects the community's process of recalibrating its perception. Each conversation represents someone trying to reconcile what they once believed with what they are beginning to see more clearly. Some individuals may respond defensively at first because acknowledging a misunderstanding can feel like admitting a mistake. Others may react with enthusiasm because they sense that the truth about you reveals a story of resilience and growth that was hidden for too long. Regardless of the specific reaction, the common thread connecting them all is transformation. The narrative surrounding you is changing, and people are feeling the emotional weight of that change. This transformation also highlights an important aspect of your journey as a chosen individual. When someone walks a path defined by authenticity and perseverance, their story often unfolds slowly. The truth about their character becomes visible through years of consistent behavior rather than through dramatic declarations. During those years, misunderstandings may circulate because not everyone witnesses the full journey. Yet once the truth begins emerging, often through the voice of someone who observed the journey closely, it can shift perception quickly. The reason for that rapid shift is simple. The truth carries a different energy than speculation. It resonates with people because it aligns with the subtle observations they may have made without fully trusting their own impressions at the time. The person now speaking about you has essentially unlocked that recognition within others. Their words have given people permission to revisit their own experiences with you and interpret them through a new perspective. This is why the reaction appears so intense. It is not merely about one statement or one conversation. It is about the sudden realization that a deeper story has been unfolding beneath the surface for years. People are reacting strongly because they are witnessing the collapse of an old narrative and the emergence of a new one at the same time. And whenever such a transformation occurs, it naturally captures attention. The emotional energy surrounding your name reflects the significance of that moment. It is the sound of perception, shifting of understanding, evolving, and of truth slowly finding its place within the collective awareness of the community. The community starts re-examining the past, begins quietly but spreads with surprising momentum, once people realize that the narrative surrounding you may not have been as complete as they once believed. When a new perspective enters a community and begins challenging the story everyone thought they understood, the natural response is reflection. Individuals start looking backward, mentally revisiting situations that once seemed settled. Moments that previously felt ordinary suddenly appear more significant because they are now being viewed through a different lens. Conversations begin to shift from simple reactions to deeper examination. People ask questions that had never been asked before. They wonder how certain assumptions became so widely accepted in the first place. They start recalling old interactions, small details, and conversations that once seemed insignificant, but now feel like missing pieces of a much larger picture. This process of reflection is rarely loud or dramatic at the beginning. It often happens privately within the minds of individuals who begin comparing the earlier narrative with the reality they have personally experienced. Someone may remember a moment when you helped them during a difficult time without expecting recognition. Another may recall how calmly you handled criticism when others expected you to defend yourself aggressively. These memories begin resurfacing because the new conversations surrounding your name are giving people permission to question what they once took for granted. The past, which once felt fixed and unquestionable, begins appearing more complex. What once looked like clear evidence against you may now appear incomplete or misunderstood. People begin noticing that certain stories about you lacked context or were shaped by interpretations rather than direct observation. This realization does not necessarily produce immediate conclusions, but it initiates a powerful shift in perception. Instead of accepting the past as a closed chapter, the community begins reopening it. Individuals revisit the moments when your name first became associated with controversy or misunderstanding. They ask themselves whether those situations were truly as clear as they once seemed. They start connecting details that were previously scattered across time, noticing patterns that did not make sense before. For example, someone might recall that every time your name appeared in negative conversations, the source of those conversations was often the same few individuals. Another person might realize that despite hearing criticism about you for years, they personally never experienced the behavior described in those stories. These realizations accumulate gradually, but once enough people begin recognizing them, the narrative surrounding you begins transforming. The past, which once supported the earlier narrative, now becomes the very place where that narrative begins unraveling. The reason this transformation happens is because memory is not static. Human beings constantly reinterpret their past experiences as new information emerges. When someone hears a perspective that contradicts what they once believed, their mind instinctively searches for evidence that might confirm or challenge that perspective. In your situation, the evidence people are discovering within their own memories often points toward a different understanding of who you are. They begin recognizing that your actions over time consistently demonstrated patience, perseverance, and integrity even during moments when criticism surrounded you. Those qualities may not have been fully appreciated in the past because they were overshadowed by louder narratives. Yet now, as people revisit those moments, they realize that your behavior never truly matched the accusations they heard. Instead of seeing someone defined by conflict, they begin seeing someone defined by resilience. The more they reflect on their memories, the clearer this pattern becomes. Each recollection strengthens the new perspective taking shape within the community. Conversations begin shifting from repeating old accusations to questioning how those accusations gained so much influence in the first place. Some individuals may express surprise at how easily they accepted the earlier narrative without examining it closely. Others may acknowledge that they allowed the opinions of certain voices to shape their perception of you without seeking their own understanding. This stage of reflection is not necessarily about assigning blame. It is about recognizing how narratives evolve within communities and how easily they can be influenced by repetition rather than evidence. Once people become aware of this dynamic, they begin approaching the past with greater curiosity and humility. They listen more carefully to new perspectives and consider the possibility that the truth about someone's character cannot always be captured by a single story. Meanwhile, your role in this transformation remains remarkably consistent with the person you have been throughout the entire journey. You did not orchestrate this reevaluation. You did not demand that others reconsider their understanding of you. Instead, you continued living your life with the same quiet discipline that carried you through the earlier years of misunderstanding. Your focus remained on growth, on strengthening your values, and on moving forward regardless of how others interpreted your actions. Ironically, that quiet consistency is now one of the most important pieces of evidence people discover when they revisit the past. As they reflect on their experiences with you, they realize that your behavior remained stable even during the periods when criticism was most intense. That stability becomes difficult to ignore because it contradicts the idea that you were the source of the conflict surrounding your name. Over time, the community's reflection begins producing a collective realization. The earlier narrative about you may have been built on incomplete information or influenced by individuals who had their own reasons for interpreting events in a particular way. Recognizing this does not necessarily erase the past, but it changes how the past is understood. Situations that once appeared negative may now be seen as moments when your resilience was tested. Conversations that once seemed convincing may now appear exaggerated or misleading. This shift in understanding is powerful because it transforms the role the past plays in shaping your reputation. Instead of being used as evidence against you, those earlier events become examples of how you maintained your integrity despite misunderstanding. People begin appreciating the quiet strength it took to continue moving forward during those years. They recognize that enduring long periods of misinterpretation without losing your sense of direction requires extraordinary discipline. And as this realization spreads, the narrative surrounding you evolves further. The community begins acknowledging not only that the earlier story may have been incomplete, but also that your response to it revealed something important about your character. The person they are seeing now, the one who continues growing, speaking calmly and moving forward with clarity, is not someone who suddenly changed. It is someone who remained consistent long enough for the truth to become visible. The process of re-examining the past, therefore, becomes a form of awakening within the community. People begin understanding that the story of your life cannot be reduced to the limited interpretations they once heard. Instead, it is a much richer narrative of perseverance, growth, and quiet strength. And as that understanding continues spreading through conversations and reflections, the foundation of the old narrative dissolves, replaced by a deeper appreciation of the journey you have been walking all along. As the truth gains momentum, the energy around your name begins to shift in ways that even you may start noticing. When a long-standing narrative begins to dissolve and a more accurate understanding slowly replaces it, the change rarely happens in silence. The atmosphere surrounding a person's reputation begins to transform almost like a shift in weather. At first, it is subtle. Conversations carry a different tone. The way people speak about you starts sounding less certain, less judgmental, and more curious. Instead of repeating the old assumptions with confidence, individuals begin speaking with hesitation, asking questions rather than making declarations. This moment marks the beginning of a powerful turning point, because when curiosity replaces certainty, the door to truth begins opening wider than before. What makes this shift particularly fascinating is that it does not originate from forced confrontation or public defense. It emerges organically as more people encounter evidence that contradicts the earlier narrative. Perhaps someone recently spent time with you and experienced your presence firsthand, noticing qualities that do not align with the rumors they once heard. Perhaps another person listened carefully to the individual now speaking positively about you and realized that their description feels more consistent with what they themselves observed over the years. Each of these moments adds a small piece of weight to the scale of perception. One conversation leads to another. One realization triggers a chain reaction of reflection. Gradually, the energy surrounding your name begins transforming from suspicion to intrigue, and from intrigue to respect. People who once remained silent during conversations about you may now feel compelled to speak up, not necessarily to defend you aggressively, but to share their own experiences. Someone might mention that they always found you thoughtful and composed during moments of tension. Another person might recall how you handled criticism with unusual patience. These voices may have remained quiet in the past because the earlier narrative felt too dominant to challenge. But as the community begins reconsidering that narrative, those quieter voices gain confidence. The moment they begin sharing their experiences, the collective understanding of who you are grows richer and more balanced. Suddenly, the story surrounding you is no longer controlled by a single perspective. It becomes a mosaic of experiences, observations, and reflections that reveal a much more complex and authentic picture. What emerges from this mosaic is often something unexpected. People begin recognizing that the qualities once misinterpreted as weakness were actually signs of strength. Your silence during moments of criticism, which some may have mistaken for passivity, now appears as discipline and emotional control. Your refusal to engage in constant conflict, which others may have interpreted as avoidance, now appears as wisdom and restraint. When people reinterpret those behaviors through this new perspective, they begin appreciating the maturity it took to maintain that composure for so long. The realization carries a certain weight, because it forces observers to acknowledge how easy it is to misjudge quiet strength in a world that often celebrates loud reactions. Meanwhile, another layer of transformation begins unfolding beneath the surface of these conversations. As the truth gains momentum, individuals who once contributed to the earlier narrative may start experiencing an internal shift of their own. Some may quietly withdraw from repeating the old accusations, sensing that the environment around them is no longer receptive to those claims. Others may begin softening their language, reframing past statements in ways that distance themselves from the earlier narrative without openly confronting it. This behavior reflects a natural human instinct to adapt when the collective understanding of a situation changes. When the social atmosphere begins recognizing a new version of events, individuals often adjust their positions accordingly. What once seemed like a widely accepted story begins losing its influence, and those who once supported it may gradually step back from defending it. This transition does not necessarily require public confrontation or dramatic apologies. Often the shift happens quietly, through subtle changes in behavior and tone. People simply stop repeating the old narrative because it no longer resonates with the growing awareness surrounding your name. And as those repetitions fade, the space they once occupied becomes available for a more balanced understanding to emerge. What makes this moment particularly meaningful for someone walking the path of a chosen individual is that it demonstrates the long-term power of consistency. You did not need to prove your worth through endless arguments or dramatic declarations. Instead, you allowed time and behavior to reveal your character. The truth about who you are has been developing quietly through every decision you made, every moment. You chose patience over reaction, every situation where you remained grounded despite misunderstanding. Now that the environment around you is beginning to notice those patterns, the recognition feels almost inevitable. People sense authenticity when they encounter it repeatedly over time. Even if they once overlooked it, the evidence eventually becomes too strong to ignore. This is why the energy surrounding your name is shifting now. It is not because you suddenly became someone different. It is because the truth that was always present is finally being seen more clearly. As this recognition spreads, another interesting phenomenon begins appearing within the community. People start becoming protective of the emerging truth. When individuals realize that someone has been misunderstood, for a long time they often feel a sense of responsibility to ensure that the new understanding is not distorted again. Conversations that once revolved around doubt may now revolve around clarification. If someone repeats an outdated version of the story, another person might gently question it, asking whether that interpretation still reflects what people are discovering now. These moments of clarification help stabilize the new narrative, preventing the old assumptions from regaining their influence. Gradually, the balance of perception within the community begins stabilizing in a different direction. Instead of suspicion shaping the way people interpret your actions, curiosity and respect begin guiding their observations. This transformation creates an environment where your authentic qualities can finally be seen without the distortion of earlier narratives. Yet even as this shift unfolds, your role remains the same as it has always been. Continue moving forward with the same grounded awareness that carried you through the earlier years. The purpose of this moment is not to seek validation or to dwell on the mistakes of the past. Instead, it is an opportunity to recognize that truth has a natural rhythm. Sometimes it takes time for people to see what was always present. Sometimes it requires the courage of a single voice speaking honestly about their experience to trigger a broader reevaluation. But when that reevaluation begins, the momentum of truth can travel far beyond what anyone expected. The conversations now surrounding your name are not merely about correcting an old story. They are about revealing a deeper understanding of your character, your resilience, and the quiet strength that defined your journey long before others began noticing it. And as that understanding continues spreading through reflection and dialogue, the energy surrounding your name will keep evolving, gradually aligning with the authenticity that has guided you all along. As the community fully realizes what truly happened, respect begins, quietly replacing doubt in a way that changes the entire atmosphere around your name. What you are witnessing now is not merely a correction of misunderstanding, but the slow emergence of recognition, the kind that grows when people finally connect the scattered pieces of a story they had never examined carefully before. Recognition rarely arrives loudly. It often begins as a quiet shift in how people speak, how they listen, and how they interpret the same events they once believed they understood. The community around you is entering that phase now. Individuals who once participated in conversations shaped by uncertainty or incomplete information are beginning to realize that the truth of your journey was never as simple as the earlier narrative suggested. As they look back across the timeline of events, they begin noticing something that had previously escaped their attention. While the accusations, rumors, or misinterpretations surrounding you changed frequently, your behavior remained remarkably consistent. That consistency now stands out like a steady light in a room where the shadows have finally started fading. The more people reflect on it, the more they recognize that consistency as a form of quiet authority. Authority not built on loud declarations or attempts to control the narrative, but on the discipline of living according to your values, even when no one seemed ready to acknowledge them. This realization carries a powerful psychological effect because it forces observers to confront a deeper truth about human perception. People often believe they understand someone based on fragments of information collected over time. Yet when they revisit those fragments with a clearer perspective, they sometimes discover that the conclusions they once formed were shaped more by repetition than by direct evidence. In your case, that discovery is beginning to ripple through the community. One person realizes that their own experiences with you never truly matched the criticism they heard. Another begins recalling situations where your response to pressure revealed patience rather than hostility. Someone else remembers how you continued helping others even during periods when your own reputation was under strain. Each recollection adds weight to the growing understanding that the story about you was incomplete. What makes this transformation particularly meaningful is that it unfolds without you needing to demand it. The recognition is not something you forced into existence. It is something people arrived at through their own reflection. When individuals reach a conclusion through personal observation rather than persuasion, that conclusion tends to remain far more stable. They trust it because they discovered it themselves. This is why the respect forming around your name now carries a different quality than the earlier narrative ever had. It is not based on hearsay or emotional reactions. It is built on the gradual accumulation of first-hand realization. People are beginning to see you not through the lens of someone else's interpretation, but through the pattern of your own actions. And that pattern reveals something difficult to ignore: resilience sustained over time. The journey you have walked was not defined by a single moment of triumph or failure. It was defined by years of persistence during periods when misunderstanding could have easily discouraged you from continuing forward. That persistence now appears extraordinary to those who are finally noticing it. Many individuals are beginning to ask themselves how someone could endure such a long period of criticism or misinterpretation without losing direction. The answer, though simple, carries profound depth. You continued because your purpose was never dependent on public approval. You understood, perhaps even before others did, that a life guided by integrity often requires patience while the world catches up to the truth. That patience is now being recognized for what it truly was: strength. Strength not expressed through confrontation, but through endurance. Strength that allowed you to remain focused on growth rather than distraction. Strength that prevented temporary misunderstandings from altering the deeper direction of your journey. As the community begins recognizing this strength, the emotional tone surrounding your name inevitably changes. Conversations that once revolved around speculation now revolve around reflection. Instead of asking what went wrong, people begin asking how they overlooked the signs of your character for so long. Some may even express quiet admiration for the composure you maintained throughout the entire experience. They realize that many individuals placed in the same situation might have reacted very differently. Some might have fought constantly to defend themselves. Others might have withdrawn completely from the environment that misunderstood them. Yet you chose a different path. You continued building your life with the same focus and discipline that guided you from the beginning. That decision now stands as a powerful example within the community. It demonstrates that truth does not always need immediate validation to remain valid. Sometimes truth simply needs time to reveal itself through consistent behavior. The recognition emerging now is therefore not only about correcting the past. It is also about acknowledging the example your journey provides. People observing this transformation begin understanding that character is not defined by what others say during moments of confusion, but by how someone continues moving forward when those moments occur. Your response to adversity becomes a form of quiet teaching for those around you. It shows that dignity can survive even the most persistent misunderstanding. It shows that patience can outlast false narratives. And perhaps most importantly, it shows that authenticity does not require constant explanation. Over time, authenticity becomes visible on its own. As this understanding spreads, the respect surrounding your name begins stabilizing into something deeper than simple admiration. It becomes trust. Trust that the person they see now is the same person who remained steady throughout the earlier years. Trust that your actions will continue reflecting the same values that carried you through that journey. Trust that your presence in the community contributes something meaningful rather than something uncertain. This trust is powerful because it transforms the role you occupy within the environment around you. You are no longer viewed through the shadow of the earlier narrative. Instead, you become someone whose story represents resilience, clarity, and growth. The community, having witnessed the evolution of that story, begins recognizing that your journey carries lessons about patience, perspective, and the long-term power of integrity. And as this recognition deepens, something remarkable happens. The very experience that once seemed like a burden becomes part of the reason people now respect you. The years of misunderstanding did not diminish your path. They revealed its strength. They demonstrated that your sense of direction could survive even when public perception struggled to keep pace with reality. In the end, the realization spreading through the community is simple but profound. They are beginning to see you not as the person defined by the stories once told about you, but as the person revealed through years of consistent action. And when people finally see someone through that lens, the respect that forms is far more durable than the doubt that existed before. As everything comes full circle, you begin realizing that what once looked like endless opposition was actually preparing the ground for your true recognition. When a long journey of misunderstanding, resistance, and quiet perseverance finally begins, revealing its deeper meaning. The realization does not arrive like a sudden explosion. Instead, it unfolds gradually, almost like dawn, slowly illuminating a landscape that was always there, but hidden in darkness. You begin noticing that the same community, which once seemed confused about who you were, is now observing you with a different kind of attention. The tone of conversations shifts from speculation to reflection, from suspicion to curiosity, and from curiosity to genuine respect. Yet the most important transformation does not occur within the community alone. It happens inside you. Because when you step back and look at the full arc of your journey, you begin understanding something that could not be fully understood while you were still walking through the most difficult chapters. Every challenge, every moment of misunderstanding, every time someone questioned your intentions or misread your silence was shaping something far more significant than the temporary discomfort those moments created. They were building the internal structure required for the stage you are entering now. Many people imagine that recognition arrives as a reward for persistence, but the deeper truth is that recognition is often a side effect of transformation. The real purpose of the journey was never to prove your worth to the crowd. The purpose was to strengthen your clarity, refine your patience, and develop a level of emotional discipline that cannot be taught through comfort. When you look back now, you may notice that the periods when the narrative around you felt most distorted were also the periods when your inner growth accelerated the most. Those were the seasons when you learned to move without constant validation, when you discovered how to continue building your path even when the surrounding environment misunderstood your intentions. That ability to remain steady in uncertain conditions is rare, and that rarity is precisely why the shift happening now carries so much meaning. People are beginning to recognize that the person standing before them today did not arrive here through luck or sudden change. You arrived here through years of quiet refinement. Each misunderstanding forced you to look deeper into your own motives and values. Each obstacle required you to decide whether you would react emotionally or respond with maturity. Each moment when your character was questioned presented a choice between defending your image or strengthening your substance. You consistently chose the path that required greater discipline, and that choice has shaped the energy people now feel when they encounter you. Because what others are sensing is not merely confidence, it is clarity. And clarity has a presence that people instinctively recognize, even if they cannot immediately explain it. This presence is the result of someone who has walked through confusion without becoming confused about themselves. It is the quiet authority that forms when a person's internal compass remains aligned despite external noise. When people observe that kind of steadiness, it challenges them to reconsider everything they once assumed. They realize that someone capable of maintaining such composure over a long period of adversity must possess a deeper sense of purpose than they initially imagined. That realization begins reshaping the way they interpret your entire journey. Situations that once looked like conflict now appear as moments where your resilience was being tested. Conversations that once seemed critical now appear as reflections of the uncertainty others were experiencing, rather than flaws in your character. Even the voices that once opposed you become part of a larger story about growth and transformation. Because without those voices, the strength of your consistency might never have been revealed so clearly. And this is where the deeper wisdom of your experience begins emerging. You start understanding that the opposition you encountered was never truly capable of stopping your path. It was only capable of revealing whether your commitment to that path was genuine. If your direction had been based purely on approval, the criticism might have been enough to make you turn away. But because your direction came from something deeper, your values, your vision, and the quiet conviction guiding your actions, the criticism eventually lost its influence. The same challenges that once seemed like barriers became the very conditions that strengthened your foundation. Now that the community around you is beginning to recognize that foundation, the shift in perception appears almost inevitable. People are drawn to authenticity because authenticity is rare. In a world where many individuals adapt their identity to match the expectations of others, encountering someone who remained consistent despite pressure creates a powerful impression. It reminds observers that integrity is still possible even in environments filled with noise and distraction. This realization often inspires people more than they initially expect. Some begin reflecting on their own lives, asking themselves whether they have allowed outside opinions to shape their direction more than they intended. Others find encouragement in the idea that patience and perseverance can eventually reveal truth even when the journey feels slow or uncertain. Your story, therefore, becomes more than a personal experience. It becomes a mirror through which others examine their own relationship with resilience, purpose, and authenticity. The community that once questioned you now begins learning from the example your journey provides. Yet perhaps the most important aspect of this moment is the perspective it gives you. Because as recognition begins replacing misunderstanding, you have the opportunity to see your past with a clarity that was not possible before. Instead of remembering those difficult years as periods of unfairness or frustration, you can now recognize them as stages of preparation. They prepared you for a level of awareness that many people never develop because their lives never required it. They taught you how to navigate complexity without losing direction. They showed you how to remain grounded when circumstances tempted you to react impulsively. And they revealed the extraordinary strength that exists within patience when patience is guided by purpose. As everything comes full circle, you begin realizing that the journey was never about defeating your critics or proving them wrong. It was about discovering who you would become while walking through the environment they created. And the person who emerges from that environment is someone far more resilient, far more self-aware, and far more aligned with their purpose than the person who began the journey. The recognition now unfolding around you is simply the external reflection of that internal transformation. People are finally seeing what was quietly developing all along. And as they continue recognizing it, the narrative surrounding your name evolves from one of misunderstanding to one of perseverance, from uncertainty to respect, and from confusion to clarity. In that transformation lies the true completion of the cycle you have been walking for so long. As this journey of reflection, revelation, and quiet transformation reaches its natural closing point, you begin to understand that what unfolded around your name was never just a story about reputation, rumor, or misunderstanding. It was a long, unfolding lesson about endurance, perception, and the mysterious timing through which truth eventually finds its way to the surface. The same path that once seemed filled with resistance now reveals itself as a training ground, where your character was shaped through experiences that required patience, restraint, and an unusual level of emotional maturity. While others were forming quick conclusions or repeating narratives that lacked depth, you were continuing to grow, often in silence, guided by a deeper sense that your journey could not be defined by temporary opinions. Now, as the atmosphere surrounding you begins to shift, and the community slowly recognizes what has always been present in your character, the meaning of those earlier years becomes clearer. They were not wasted time, nor were they signs that your path had been blocked. They were simply seasons where the truth about you had not yet been fully seen. Every individual who now begins questioning the old narrative and recognizing the authenticity of your journey is participating in the natural correction that time eventually brings to every misunderstanding. Yet the most powerful realization lies in the understanding that your worth was never dependent on that correction. The strength you built during those years came from walking your path regardless of who understood it at the moment. And because you continued forward with that clarity, the recognition now emerging carries a deeper weight. It is not the fragile praise that fades with the next rumor, but the steady respect that grows when people observe consistency over time. As you step forward from this chapter, you carry with you the quiet knowledge that perseverance reveals truths that noise cannot erase. The journey may have tested your patience, but it also revealed your resilience. And in that resilience lies the real victory, because the person you have become through this process is far stronger than any narrative that once attempted to define you.